Every job that I've had no clue that it was even a job or that it was even an opportunity because
Right.
I just was literally in the right place at the right time, talking to the right people, and the opportunities were put in front of me. And
I am Bonner's program. I'm Riley. I'm here with Joe Rieland. He is a organ transplant slash transplant recovery specialist, I guess. I don't know the technical term. What is your technical term, I guess?
well, so for my full-time job now, I am technical and support specialist for organ recovery systems. But I
Okay.
also, over the last 9 years, I was an organ recovery specialist with the Wisconsin Donor Network. I spent a year up at UW Stevens Point
Mm.
doing land use planning for the Department of Natural Resources.
Oh,
So I
interesting.
think I think what's going to be interesting is all of this is going to come full circle. Then what happened was a good family friend of ours, he was the battalion chief, and he and I had a really nice conversation, and he said, "Joe, firefighting would be the way for you. It would, he goes, you would do really well with it and you'd really enjoy it."
Mm.
And it was always something kind of in the back of my mind of like forest firefighting and, being, helping out with the forest fighting, in with the Department of Natural Resources. But that's pretty dangerous. And then Greg and I talked, and he kind of suggested firefighting, more urban and in the city and whatnot. And he kind of talked me through the path in which you need to take.
Mm.
So he said, well, you need to go to METC and get your Fire One and your EMT, which that's exactly what I did.
Mm.
And that got me started. And I'll be honest with you, EMT was my first real dive into the medical field.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you right now that if you want some of the best patient care experience, some of the best knowledge, and just learning how to work and deal with people, you
Yeah.
see the best and the worst of people's lives. And it was awesome. I loved
Yeah.
it. What happened for me was I was in my paramedic clinicals doing my intubations. And I still remember the anesthesia tech. She's awesome. She's still a friend of mine today. And she looked at me and she goes, we're hiring. And I looked at her, I said, well, what is this job? I had no clue what an anesthesia tech was. And
Right.
you're going to find that kind of in what I'm all going to be talking about is every job that I've had no clue that it was even a job or that it was even an opportunity because
Right.
I just was literally in the right place at the right time, talking to the right people, and the opportunities were put in front of me. So I ended up going back for my bachelor's degree. I went to school full time. I ended up working as an anesthesia tech full time, and then I was kind of a part time paramedic or
Mm.
EMT firefighter. But I
Mhm.
think in my mind, my career path was taking a different turn because of how fascinated I was with anesthesia. I was
Yeah.
fascinated with what you can do to the body with different drugs.
Mhm.
So we ended up having to, over a period of 3 weeks, we had two organ recoveries at Waukesha Memorial, and I was just enthralled with it. I looked at it and I'm like, boy, this is cool. And so the job turned from phone calls and paperwork to scrubbing in, assisting, organ dissection, and then cannulation and actually placing these specifically kidneys and
Mhm.
kidneys on these perfusion pumps. So what ended up happening was is our team ended up uh, going and getting trained to actually do the physical recovery of research organs for the purposes of research. So what I mean by that is any organ that is deemed non-transplantable, that we can't recover for transplant, we
Mhm.
will allocate it and attempt to allocate it for research purposes. And really, ultimately, what that means is we're trying to maximize the gift that that person is willing to give to us. Really, ultimately, I can tell you right now, I was doing things in that operating room that only doctors can do. But because the laws and the regulations for organ donation and research and tissue recovery are different, I was qualified and allowed to be able to go forward with those
Mhm.
those those recoveries. I loved it. absolutely loved it. Then it's interesting because after I ended up getting this job, I was on an organ recovery, and you don't know who the recipients are. You've never met them. You don't know who's going to be getting these organs. And I was on a recovery one day, and it was just like any other normal recovery. And okay, it was done, did my paperwork, and I kind of, forgot about it. Well, about 5 years later, a volunteer came up to me, and he handed in Bill's his name, and he handed me a plate of cookies. They were in the shape of a heart. And I'm like, Bill, what's this for? And Bill goes to me, well, today's the 5 year anniversary of my heart transplant. And it happened to be that I was on his case. And I didn't realize that. Bill didn't know that. And so I ended up looking at what role I was that day. I was actually a second call role. So that meant that I was scrubbed in. I was
Mm.
actually assisting and packaging and working with the organs that day. So I literally held Bill's heart in my hand that
Wow.
day at work. And I'm getting goosebumps right now as I'm
I have
talking.
chills. I have
Yeah,
chills.
because it's full circle, death and life, and getting to be really good friends with Bill. Well, I didn't tell Bill about this right away.
Mhm.
I used it as ammo because it turns out it actually worked out really good, because I was actually going to be going out to dinner. Well, I went out to dinner with Bill and Diane a couple weeks later, and I knew that this was going to be my opportunity to share the news with them.
Yeah.
So I ended up dropping the bombshell on Bill. I said, Bill, I just want to let you know something. I said, I understand that uh, you haven't been able to communicate with the recipient family, and I obviously, as a practitioner, I had to respect that. I couldn't
Mhm.
share with Bill any of the donor family demographics and HIPAA information. But what I did share with Bill is, I told him, Bill, I was there that day. I held your heart in my hand. And Bill's face turned white, Diane's face turned white, and their forks hit their plate.
Yeah.
It was kind of
Yeah.
funny. And they started to cry, of course. And they actually said to me, they're like, Joe, this is the closure that we needed, to know that a friend of ours was actually there.
Mm.
And then Bill kind of brought it back into perspective for me, is that, there's somebody on the other side that is really living to this day because of the work that I do.
Yeah.
And Bill and Diane, we keep in touch, and he brings me back to life, or back to earth, and like keeps me into some perspective, and
Yeah.
and he's living and walking because of maybe some of the work that I did that day.
If someone, let's say someone sees this and they know they want to do organ recovery, like what would be their path, I guess, for their training or schooling?
I would highly recommend surgical tech.
Okay.
Really, so let me give a little background knowledge.
Hmm.
So specifically, every transplant center, or most transplant centers, are kind of structured in a different way, where they have specific organ preservationists. Typically, they hire their organ preservationists from their surgical tech staff. They
Okay.
basically ask their tech staff, are you interested in doing some travel? Are you interested in flying on Lear jets and flying out to California to do an organ recovery and come back and transplant?
Hmm.
It takes a special person to want to do it.
Yeah.
The other thing is organ procurement organizations. So look that up, OPOs.
Hmm.
There are 58 of them in the United States. They are federally designated organizations that manage an organ donor and get consent on an organ donor. So what's nice about OPOs is there's 58 of them in the United States, and every one of them pretty much is always hiring, because there's always a shortage. It's a high burnout, high stress job, but a lot of them are there's a lot of opportunity out there. If you want to be guaranteed a job, and if you're a good worker, they're always hiring.
How long does like a typical organ recovery take, or does it vary? Does it vary like a lot?
I love that question, because my my so in the operating room. So I'm going to talk about just specifically the operating room, because
For
what
you,
happened?
is this for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's funny because I actually respond to our lab 3 to 4 hours prior to actually getting to the operating room. And then once we get into the OR, um, it's about 2 hours prior, um, before the patient gets in the room. And then once the patient gets in the room, we make incisions. So I'm going to just speak to patient in room time.
Okay.
You have to figure you have to add about 2 to 3 hours on each end in addition to patient in room time.
Okay.
Patient in room, my shortest patient in room was 45 minutes.
For
That
all
physician,
organs?
no, liver and kidneys.
Okay.
That
Okay.
physician was moving. That was, that was our fastest case ever. And we had no time to sit and do anything because he was moving so fast. But then our longest case, patient in room, we call our Gray's Anatomy case because if it could go wrong, it went wrong.
Oh man.
Um, that was 14 hours
Whoa.
that we were in the room with that
Jeepers.
patient. Yep. So those are extremes. Both of those are
Right.
extremes, but I would say a typical organ recovery for me is 3 to 5 hours,
Okay.
which is pretty typical. You can get it done in a 10-11 hour day, with adding on the front end and back end time. But if there's another organ recovery after that or another case, then you have to add that on. So you might be working a double shift or whatnot. But
Hmm.
typically there's only one in a shift or one in a day. And
Do you have, I know that now you're kind of more into I guess, the business side of it. Is that right? With the clinical and technical sales specialist
yeah, medical
role?
device. Yep, medical device side of things. Yep.
So do you have kind of a favorite and like a least favorite part of both maybe your job now and also your previous like 9 years or so of the organ recovery specialist?
Yeah. So my favorite time, so I'm going to talk about both,
Yeah.
kind of, um, uh, both a little bit. So over the past 9 years, the fact of knowing what I'm doing in that operating room, that someone's getting transplanted and someone's going to be living at the end of my day is
Hmm.
amazing. It's
Yeah.
absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, the work-life balance, that some days it sucked.
Right.
Um, yeah, there were days where, I've missed Christmas, I missed birthdays,
Hmm.
and any healthcare worker, I think, is going to tell you that. I think
Right.
they're going to say that, sometimes the call gets long, the hours can be really stressful. The patients and the families can be stressful, but really, you have deep down in the back of your mind the good that you're doing.
Hmm.
Now, I'm going to be honest with you. My new job, the work-life balance is amazing.
Yeah.
The work-life balance is amazing. It's more scheduled. I did get a little bit of a pay jump by going to the new company, so
There you
that's
go.
always helpful. Yeah, I think if anybody tells you that pay isn't a part of, success, I think they're lying to you. Not that we all do it for the money, but yet it helps. We all have
Yeah.
bills to
Yeah,
pay.
for sure.
Student loans are a wonderful thing. Um, I think in another life I was a biomedical engineer
Mm.
or an electrical engineer because I'm fascinated with tinkering,
Yeah.
and um, I'm loving just working with these devices and seeing that the organs are actually doing so much better on them. And I kind of built up to that with you know being at the donor network and kind of doing the recoveries. And I'll be honest, I do miss being in that operating room. I do miss, doing all the anatomy and doing the dissection. And that's something that I do in my training now. And I'm able to still get a piece of that in my
Yeah.
training that I do.
Do you have anything else, I guess, for any of the students on AMP Honors program that might be interested in this or anything like that? Any advice or anything else you'd like to add or share in regards to your job or
You know,
just life in general?
yeah, work hard. There's nothing wrong with playing, work hard, play hard, but at the same time, the people and my friends that I see that are the most successful and happiest are the people that have just really been diligent and working hard and keeping their nose to the grindstone.
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong with telling your friends I got to study. There's nothing wrong with telling your friends I got to write my paper. My girlfriend right now, she's writing her dissertation for her PhD, and I keep
Oof.
telling her, I'm like, I'm not envious of her at all, but she basically, she's telling me all the time, Joe, I gotta write. I'm like, all right, do it. You have to be
Mhm.
supportive, be supportive of the ones around you, but also it's okay to say no. And I think that's one of the most important things that I'm actually still trying to figure out is how to say the word no,
Yeah.
and how to say the word, I need time for myself to be successful.
Mhm.
And I think that's okay to say that, every once in a while.